All right, everyone. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for this installment of the WaterWatch Lecture Series. My name is Brian Taylor, and I work for the North and South Rivers Watershed Association. I'm the educator with the organization, and if you are not familiar with the North-South Rivers Watershed, or NSRWA, we are just a local small conservation nonprofit. Our office is in Norwell, but we do programs all throughout the South Shore, from Hall all the way down to Duxbury and Kingston. So our main focus is to preserve and protect our most valuable natural resource, of course, that being water. And through engagement, scientific research, and educational programs just like this, we strive to ensure that we have healthy water both for people and for the environment through the South Shore. So just by tuning into these programs, you're helping support what we do, and we really appreciate that. So thanks for tuning in. I see we've got close to 50 people on Zoom, and then we've got a good audience here live in person. So thank you all for showing up tonight, and thanks for tuning in online. Before we begin, I do want to give a shout out to our sponsors for the WaterWatch Lecture Series, Clean Harbors. Thank you very much for your support, as well as the Massachusetts Cultural Councils of Hingham, Marshfield, Scituate, Norwell, Pembroke, and Rockland. Thank you so much for your continued support of our educational programs. So this program, it's been going on for, I think 35 years. So it's been a great program for education. In terms of other programs, real quick, the North-South Rivers has a February school break youth program. So if anyone out there has youth or knows youth that are looking for something to do outside, February break, February 17th through the 20th, a 4-day program. You can register through the Norwell or Scituate Recreation Departments. And so we're running an outdoor youth adventure program, animal tracking, things like that. So some forest ecology, geocaching. So if there's anyone interested in any of those programs, you can check out Norwell or Scituate Recreation Departments. This program has been a fantastic partnership between the NSRWA and Mass Audubon. And tonight we have Katie here joining us with Mass Audubon, and who I will send it over just for a moment. Go ahead, Katie.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mass Audubon, North River, and Marshfield. We're so happy to have you all here and those in Zoom world that are joining us tonight. We love the WaterWatch series and are always glad when we get to partner with the NSRWA. As a friendly reminder that we also have some programs that are happening. We always have great programs happening out of here, but special ones that we have coming up are our Winterfest, which is this Saturday. There'll be live raptors and s'mores and all sorts of fun stuff. And then we also have Saturday afternoon. And then February vacation camp we have as well. So ages 7 to 12, feel free to sign them up or give us a call here, and I'm happy to help you. So thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Katie, and thanks for having us. This is a great venue for us. So
yeah, we love it.
Yeah, and next week's program will be here as well. So if you want to tune in person and be part of our live audience, you are welcome to come here too. With that, I would like to introduce Chris Kraforst with the Director of Climate Adaptations and Conservation with the Town of Hall, who is our presenter tonight. We also have Joanna in the background, who will be running the slideshow for folks in Zoom land. So, wow, we're close to 60 people here tuning in on Zoom tonight.
Oh, great.
No pressure, Chris.
Absolutely none at all. So first of all, thank you, North and South River Watershed Association. Thanks, Mass Audubon. This is a great place. This is a great lecture series. I saw Lyle Nyberg's talk last week, and I hope to make a little bit of a connection to that today. I also would like to introduce John Struzieri from the Town of Hall. He's also a co-presenter here. There's going to be some slides he'll speak to. And I also wanted to recognize Joanna Nadow from Weston and Sampson, who's our cloud voice today as well. We're going to also try to do something a little interactive. So if you have your camera on your phone, there'll be a, what do they call it?
QR code.
QR code that you can click into, take to a site and do an interactive poll. We're going to ask some questions and do that. So, when we first met to join in on this series, we came up with this title called Riding the Rising Tide, Hull's plan for changing coast, for a changing coast. But really what this talk is about today is climate change. And, how are we managing climate change impacts? And so it really is about that. And before I get into that, I just was going to give you sort of at least my understanding of climate vulnerability. In Hull, we often talk about sea level rise and others. So we're going to do a coastal focus on climate change impacts today, but there are many others. And then I'm going to talk about this concept of a climate adaptation roadmap. Trying to understand our existence today and where it's going to be down the road. And what do we need to do to prepare either now or just down the road or intermediate, and then maybe start asking some hard questions even further down the road, where we're going to be and what are we going to do about it. And then part of this exercise that I'm engaged in, I work for the town of Hull, and I do a lot of community engagement and also planning with the town to ask these questions and also to connect with the folks that are living there, because as we plan ahead, you all have to come along, right? We can't just build a bridge to nowhere and then say, oh yeah, we left a bunch of people behind. So that's kind of the concept that we're going to explore today. And at what scale is it effective? Can we be effective in an adaptation roadmap for the town of Hull, the town of Marshfield, for the South Shore, or even a small neighborhood in a town somewhere that's experiencing some sort of impact? And then we're going to focus in on one project, a little bit of detail. And then maybe talk about other problem areas and see how this relates to all of you. And that maybe we can explore in the discussion, questions, and the answer period at the end. And then we'll share a couple of upcoming events that you might be interested in. So when I started working on climate resilience, I guess they call people like me climate resilience practitioners, sort of a new emerging profession where actually when the city planners are looking at what can we do with what we're seeing coming down the road, where do we need to be in 10 years and that kind of thing. And then I was in the academic world for a number of years, and we always learned about climate change and climate change impact. And it was always what kind of scenarios can we build? What kind of models can we build to predict where we're going to be? Right. And so it was always, yeah, we're going to have to get ready. And if we do it now, it's actually going to be more cost effective than if we wait and have to respond. So the cost of actually not being prepared is, I don't know, 10 times, 20 times more than if you actually prepare. However, since I've been working in Hull, we're not preparing for climate change impacts in the future. We're dealing with it now, right now. And then it's on our doorstep and it's happening now. So, we're looking at that. Okay, we have to respond now. And if we're doing something that is infrastructure building, or we have to make the roads new, how long is that road going to be there? How long is that new building going to be there? What's the life of that building? So the question you have to ask is, what is the environment around that building going to be for the life of that building? And when you build a municipal building, you're planning 50 years out of that. It's not cheap, right? So 50 years down the road, are you prepared for any impact? So I just wanted to say that these impacts are all over. Western Massachusetts and Vermont had those huge rain events and flooding that's happening inland, right? So I just wanted to pay service to that as a coastal climate practitioner. we tend to think in terms of what we see around us. And those impacts. And again, I think what we're preparing mostly for is rising seas and those coastal storms that come that are sitting on top of higher waters. And how's that gonna impact us? But for other communities, there are other things that need to be addressed, right? And we know it, we see it all over. We're seeing these big storms. We're seeing 3 years ago, Australia was on fire essentially. The big fires in the Northwest and in Canada. So, these are the climate change impacts that are actually hitting us now. And, there may have been historically a storm that would describe something that we see of large scale, although lately we're seeing record events, but they didn't occur as frequently as they're occurring. All right, so what about Hall and where we are? Let's, Joanna, can you tell us what the question is? So if you guys online know how to do this, if you guys want to participate here in this poll, you click on this, it takes you to a website, and I think the question pops up.
Yep, that's right. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yep, so you can either put in slido.com and then enter the code Hull, or you can do a picture with your camera and get that QR code. And then when you get there, the question is, what climate impacts are you noticing in your community?
And what do we do, Joanne? Want to give them like a few minutes, right?
Yep, we've got several have already said flooding and drought.
Yep, okay. So, like I said, one of the things I wanted to reiterate is, my focus tends to be, the immediate issues that the residents that I'm dealing with have, but we also are aware of so many other impacts that others may be experiencing. And I know that in the South Shore, there are, the communities, even the coastal communities, are having in place certain programs and resiliency measures that they're taking to address these impacts from climate change. So, Joanna, do you want to share results, or I'm gonna go on?
Yeah, I'll tell you a couple big ones were the flooding, drought, erosion, winds, tides, extreme weather. So that all sounds pretty familiar. Are you ready for the next poll?
So we'll be able to capture that, and I can share that at a later point.
There's a lot of.
Nice, okay, and that's online too. So if you want to see the results of how that's displayed, these are available on YouTube eventually.
Yep.
You can go to, so check that out. So flooding's the big one, drought, and then there was the third one. But anyway, great, that worked. I'm excited.
Yeah. And then the next one was, how is your community dealing with climate impacts? So do you want to do that now? Oh, sorry, you have a slide in between those two, don't you?
Do I? Yeah, sort of. So, like what can we do about all these different impacts? And I think one of the Slido slides was asking that. And is that going to be a word diagram as well, Joanna?
That'll be a list. That'll be you'll get the full answers. Mm-hmm.
All right, so set that up, and then I'll just speak on this slide for a little bit longer. Is that
Great.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. I think this is working out okay.
Yeah.
Right? All right, so what can be done is kind of where John and I always sit. John runs the wastewater treatment facility and is the assistant director to DPW. So John has his hands and his feet deeply in community response and needs. And a lot of those are related to, John's favorite saying is, if we don't flow, you don't go, kind of thing. And I'm stealing his thunder. And then, all of, on the shoulders of DPW, they're the ones that, hey, our road is flooding, there's water coming up through the street drains. And, typically the response is, well, we've got to block off those roads and educate or anticipate or other measures. And so this project that we're going to focus in on has really developed out of that sort of need a really concentrated and intense need in an area, a neighborhood. So what can be done? Obviously, I think what we do is we adapt, whether we become more resilient or we find adaptive measures to accommodate and live with the existential threat of climate change impacts. So for instance, if I live in an area, actually, I'll back up a bit. We had a person who had bought a house in the summertime in Hull and experienced extreme winter flooding within months in the winter. And he was standing on his porch, surrounded by water. And I forget how I was called on site. I think he had heard that there was potentially help in the climate adaptation conservation department to help mitigate flooding. And he said that he had no idea that this flooded this deep. I mean, his car was almost completely underwater in the driveway. So, that's where I was going with it. Adapt. So, once you experience things, you're going to adapt. You're not going to park your car during certain times of the year because you know that there's going to be astronomical tides. And guess what? They're predicting a surge on top of that. So you adapt. That's near. That's either now or in the near future. What are you going to do in the near future? Right? And then how far down the road? What are you going to do? So I'm going to talk about a couple of those aspects in a little more detail. Elevate your homes. I know Marshfield, Situate have been very active in those efforts. In fact, Town of Hull, has sort of modeled our home elevation grant program. And I'll briefly talk about that after what Situate and Marshfield have been doing, because they have to go, municipalities have to go through the same process to work with residents in doing that. But the last one is the end of the road, right? Do you retreat? Do you leave? You might have a family home that's been handed down for generations. You may have decided that Hull is so beautiful in the morning sunrises and the sunsets, the summer beach days, and even the beautiful winters there. That's where I want to live. But I never expected the problems that I would be having to live there, or the conditions by which I have to live there now. Do we plan to retreat? We got a slide though, again, Joanna.
Lots of input on this one.
Yes, we've got how is your community dealing with climate impacts? We have over 20 answers. Beach nourishment, move to higher ground, elevating houses, switching from pond reservoirs to MWRA water supply, seawalls, voting green, educational programs, more seawalls, tide gates, fighting denial.
Everybody's thinking about this. Yeah. It's not as cryptic as it may have been a decade or two ago. So I think everybody's experiencing some of this weather or climate events and really thinking about how we can move ahead. That's great. All right. So I promised you a little bit of a coastal focus, and I'm going to talk about the peninsula that we call the town of Hull. One of the real beneficial features of the town of Hull to the region is it's a barrier beach. And I'll show you an interesting cartoon that sort of describes our barrier beach from a historical perspective. And some of my earlier academic pursuits was to study coastal geology. So I was really interested always when I moved to Massachusetts, just the geological, physical characteristic of the town of Hull. And it's a barrier beach essentially, right? And in this diagram here, this is what the state classifies as a barrier beach. And a barrier beach is exactly what it is. When I was studying in Virginia, I lived on the eastern shore, and their barrier beaches on that peninsula are offshore. They're not developed. There's barrier beaches offshore, there's lagoons, and then the mainland. And the way that barrier beaches function is they take the brunt of coastal storms. And in fact, in some places where they're allowed to naturally exist, they migrate. So if sea level is rising, they don't drown, they move landward. Sometimes they close that gap, that lagoon that exists. Well, for Boston, I wouldn't call Boston Harbor a lagoon, but this barrier beach exists out in the forefront of the ocean, protecting all of these communities that rim the inside of Boston Harbor. So they provide this barrier beach provides that energy protection from coastal storms and waves and breaks that up and prevents that wave energy and wave damage activity that is experienced out here from getting inside. Now, that's not to say that on some days when the wind is honking across Boston Harbor, there can be significant fetches that can generate some waves in Boston Harbor, but they are never at the levels that are experienced in Massachusetts Bay and in the open ocean. So this provides sort of that value. So I always say a vibrant, healthy community in Hull is valuable because there's a real interest in keeping that barrier beach functioning where it is and providing that storm protection. Just a little coastal geology, you can still see this. So the barrier beach that was Hull was actually old glacial deposits when the Ice Age retreated about 10,000 years ago, left these big mounds of rock and gravel and material on the coast. So as the ice sheet retreats, these remnants of sediment get left behind. And this is actually a view of Strawberry Hill from a paper that was printed in 1919, I think, or 13, that shows that feature. And you can see that today. And so this is just a drumlin. So the direction of the glacial flow is, usually you can tell by that type of shape. So just some really cool geological features in Hull. There's a great paper that was put together that actually analyzed how that barrier beach formed over several thousands of years. And I just wanted to take a moment and touch base with some local geology. And to, again, provide the importance for that physical structure that exists out in Boston Harbor just doesn't benefit the community. It's part of that regional nature of Boston Harbor. Very important. So this is my barrier beach cartoon. And in Hull, this is a typical profile across the beach, here being the Atlantic Ocean or Massachusetts Bay, and then Boston Harbor, and then this beach in between. One of the key features on this is that the highest point across some of those areas in Hull, other than where the old drumlins used to be, so there are hills in Hull. Those were the old drumlins that have slowly eroded away and formed the beaches between those drumlins. That's that barrier beach. And this is a slice across that. The highest elevation is where those dunes are on the Atlantic side, and it has actually fairly low lying at sea level already. And in the day, there were wetlands too in areas that were fairly wet. And I always envision, if I was a person that found Hull in the day before it was settled, and I was able to look up the peninsula, get on one of those hills and look up, I would see a beautiful sandy beach, and in between are rolling hills of sand dunes, right? And I would think, oh, where am I gonna build my house? So the first year I'm there, I'm like right on the beach. This is great. Wake up in the morning, sun sets, go digging clams, catching fish. First winter hits. I'm like, what am I doing here? So I move up on top of the hill, right? So that's kind of, I think that might have been the strategy of folks when they first settled into it. So they still, started to build houses all along this barrier beach. I think it says somewhere in some great book somewhere that says you shouldn't build a foundation in sandy soils. Anyway, we did, we still do, right? And we continue to. And we continue to build. And so essentially what we have is, what we have today. So this used to be, all of this area used to be dunes. So that's, John, that's why there was no title on this. Yeah, and we still have beautiful coastal dunes, but they are the primary frontal protection that the town has. And we invest a lot of protection, I guess, on those. Don't mess with the dunes. They're relatively cheap, but they're very effective. So when we do get a coastal storm, sometimes this dune will get wiped out and completely stripped away. And that's what dunes are supposed to do. They absorb that energy, they blow away because they protect the house that's right behind that, most cases. And you know what nature does? After the storm leaves, and maybe a few seasons, that material comes back. And we've been monitoring these dunes for a number of years. And since 2018, the dunes have been growing. So we've had some pretty horrific coastal storms back to back on high tides. I think it was back in March of 2018, really damaged our primary dunes. And if you look at them today, it's amazing that how well they've recovered. And it's a good thing to step back, John, sometime. Take a look at that, and I'll show you some slides from 2018. So all, as you can imagine, is getting flooded. And just because of where we are. I don't know what else I can say about that slide. But I did want to take a step back and talk about sea level rise. How much sea level rise do you think has occurred in Boston Harbor over 25 years? Online, I don't know if you can chat or whatever, anybody here have a guess if, have we seen sea level rise in Boston Harbor?
6 inches maybe?
6 inches? You saw my slide. Right on, since the year 2000. Anyway, so why do we care? Like, why are we, what do we care about sea level rise? And what are these low, intermediate, low? What are all these projections? So remember when I was saying back in the day, decade or two ago, we were trying to come up with a way to predict different climate change impacts. How much CO2 is going to be in the atmosphere? How much does that translate to global warming? How much of that translates to how the ocean's going to rise? And so that's what this model says. Hey, under these different scenarios, from something like minimal impact to if everything goes wrong, this is where we're going to be. So that's what these different projections are. And I wouldn't worry too much about that. Here's what Massachusetts works. So Massachusetts actually has worked with a number of coastal engineers and scientists to adapt estimates of sea level rise, working with information from NOAA and other federal and state agencies to feed this sea level rise prediction model. And I just want to take a moment and say, this is sea level, how high the ocean is. So it goes from 0 to 10, and this is in feet, NAVD. So when you see NAVD, what does that mean? Just in simplistic terms, it's actually a reference point, a spherical reference point for all surveyors who are doing measurements of altitude and space to reference it to something, so that when I'm measuring over on Mount Washington in Western Massachusetts and I say, oh, this is 14 feet. And somebody in Hull is on the shoreline measuring the dune and says, it's 6 feet over here. They're comparing it to something that they can reference, so they're all relative. But it also is roughly here in Hull, mean sea level. So where the average sea level is, how much are we rising above mean sea level, right? And so here's the prediction, just one exercise. So let's say we go with this green, which is the intermediate scenario in the model. 2070, somewhere around there, we should see an increase of 2.4 feet by 2070. So that sounds kind of alarming, right? That's what the models are predicting. That's what this model predicts, and it's the one that they use then to predict all along the coast where flooding might be. So they take this and actually do it by all along the coast, where there's gonna be inundation, how much sea level rise is gonna affect that. And they can also put on top of that scenarios of storms to figure out, hey, this is what's gonna happen in 2030, every 100 years or so. All right. Sorry for the graph. One more though, and this is evidence, again, sea level rise here in inches relative to mean sea level, that's MAVD again. Since 2000, and I moved to Hull in 1990, so this is 10 years after I moved into Hull, till now, 2025. Right? And what you see here is the average sea level. So, the tides are doing this all the time, right? So that whole noise, let's average it together. What's the mean sea level for that year? Boom, boom, boom. Hey, it looked like for 3 years we're losing sea level, right? So the problem is, don't interpret these trends in too short of a time period, because there's a lot of things that go on. And that's often the argument I hear from people that says, sea level rise isn't really happening. Because I see it, I just don't see it. So anyway, over the last 25 years, the annual average sea level observed in Boston by the same method, the same gauge, shows an increase of about 6 inches over the last 25 years. And I'm just going to take a step back, not too far, and we're seeming to be along this trend here. So the models seem to be agreeing. We couldn't do this before because the modern tide gauge data wasn't around enough. And to begin to analyze periods over 25 years, climate scientists think that's not unreasonable. So we've seen a half a foot in Boston Harbor in the last 25 years. And if this goes, it's not linear. So the next 25 years, we expect to see more than that. I will just throw in one phrase of hope. This is not based on what it is that we could do globally. So if we initiate something like a global forestation program, which actually was published in the Journal of Nature about 4 years ago. If we instituted a coordinated planting program across the globe, we could pump down CO2 because plants like to consume CO2 and they give us oxygen. So we could use, and this doesn't figure in some of those things that we could take. And that's why there's always been this sort of global effort to come together and initiate emissions controls, CO2 discharges, and all of this. We pump down and maybe affect this graph. Doesn't look like, at least not from the last 25 years, we're seeing that. We wouldn't see it instantly either, because that kind of momentum takes a while for it to stop. So we're on this trajectory, it looks like. I just wanted to also just show Hull in a outer space background, just to illustrate how much of our land is actually in the floodplain. How many people, are we asking that online? No. So here, folks, here, raise your hands if you know you're in the floodplain or not. Do you? Do you know if you're in the floodplain? You don't know. All right, well, that's an important, if you're living in Hull, I think you know. So I don't usually have to ask that question, but you might, if you don't know, and you live in a community. Hey, check it out. Where is your floodplain? Do you have a floodplain? I guarantee you do, and it may be river related, you know, where there are floodwaters. And just to show you, this is a map showing areas of concentrated, where residents have filed flood insurance claims, and they are concentrated in certain areas in Hull. And it's no surprise where they are, but also this one estimates what the cost in terms of, I think, 2018 up to 2000, between 1978, when the National Flood Insurance Program, whatever it was called back then, may have been called that, and it began till 2018. One of the things that I do as a representative for the community of Hull is get this information so that I can understand, serve as a floodplains manager. It's private, but I can show where those areas where folks are having flood claims and roughly the amount of money associated with that. So,
And Chris, you may want to also mention that it's not the ocean that is cause of flooding in some cases, but sometimes it's the bayside coming on the left side of this picture.
I think we'll talk about that.
Okay,
Hampton Circle, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
well, but even along the bayside here.
Yeah,
That area also is subject to flooding, and there's a number of repetitive loss claims along there.
good point, John. So we're talking tens of millions of dollars. I always show this slide whenever I'm talking about climate change. I don't know who to credit this picture for. That's the picture on the left with the woman next to the seawall. And this was taken in January of 2018 when we had record water levels reported for Boston Harbor. The highest that water levels observed in Boston Harbor occurred on this date in January 4th, 2018. And someone sent me this picture. This is a huge seawall that the Army Corps of Engineers built back in the 50s, I think it was, to protect a very low-lying area in Hull. This area, this,
Just to the down of the green box right there, right there.
yeah, right there. Is that area, if you go to the state archives in Waltham, they have pictures of flooding in that area. And it was, you know, this, I'm gonna take a moment and step back. So as a floodplains manager, as a flood liaison specialist, you know, often people tell me that, oh, you know what, the flooding used to be much worse than it is today. And my temptation, because of my ignorance, would be to roll my eye and think of, oh no, where is this person coming from? But having seen the flooding that was occurring in the 1940s in Waveland, and if there was a resident that had lived all their life there, they're absolutely correct. It used to be. And actually, that's when, you know, before we were concerned about preserving habitat and some of the natural functions of the resources, the wetlands resources we try to protect, the Army Corps built I don't know how high that wall is, but it's certainly a little bit higher than certainly higher than 9 feet, but not by much.
Is that on the bayside?
It's on the bay side.
Along Newport Road, if you know the area.
Yeah, it's on the bay side. And that was the year where the flooding was the worst, was from that side. The other thing that this does, this elevated water all around Hull and the coast, is it puts a horizon where storms can sit even higher. So if we get wind event, storm event, you know, if it's elevated higher, it's gonna be more devastating and farther reaching. So real concern. 9.62 feet NAVD. And then here's another intersection during that period. This is the intersection between out of town towards Hingham and to get up into Hull. So completely, at this point, Hull is essentially, for this period, an island and inaccessible. What are we gonna do? So what are we gonna do? What do we do? Here's another view. So the opening slide showed a catastrophic event. January, seems like we're always talking about January. And the flooding events do occur. I was looking back in the records. It seems like we're always talking about the first part of January when they're bad. January 13, 2024, not quite as high, but almost 9 feet, right? And we're going to talk about focusing in on this. What can we do? So this is actually getting flooded on the high tides, on the astronomical tides at least. And this year, we've already flooded twice, so it's January, but not to this extent. And part of the pushback, we had a public meeting last Thursday. How are we doing on time?
So we got about a little less than 20 minutes.
All right, so we're gonna wrap up. I think we're good.
Good job.
Thank you. That this is an event that I don't think we're gonna try to build a design to address. And we want to be straight about that. And that's sort of what we're learning on how to talk about. So what are we doing here? And then we're just going to go into that relatively quickly. And then open it up for you. So again, how can we adapt, right? So part of it is this roadmap. We got problems now. Town's got to do some stuff. What is it that the town's responsible for? And then 2030, which is 5 years from now, that was a horizon we were planning for. 2070, what are we gonna expect? And anything we do here, we now have to anticipate what that space and place is gonna be in those timeframes. So I wanna thank the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program because they funded this project through 3 phases to look at this area, to develop a roadmap, to manage on a small neighborhood scale adaptation to the existential threat of climate change, AKA, at least in this case, sea level rise. Now it's a little simpler because the location of this is actually on the bay side, right? Let me just back up real quick. We're talking about this area here. So here's the Atlantic Ocean, Boston Harbor, and then Boston Harbor, this is all land. So it's kind of really gonna have limited wave overwash kind of impacts, but it's gonna be sea level rise, right? Winds can be a factor, but the major problem here is rising seas, all right? So I promised I would try to do a link to Lyle Nyberg's talk. This little area here is a hand-drawn map of the area back in the late 1870s, I think. And it shows a marshland here. So I was thinking of the history of the North River. Lyle talked a lot about how did they, when folks came here, they harvested salt hay. And it was a big part of their existence. So I imagine this area was like that. It's not like that now, right? It's been filled in. One of the things we did recently was characterize the soil. So we dug test pits and borings. And the test pits revealed that this has been filled by residents, the town over the many years by 2 feet and building houses around. And they're experiencing flooding problems. Okay, so, and this is what it looks like now, right? What are we gonna do? There's a couple of key pieces here. And this is the reason why I was able to get John interested, involved, is not only the roads through, because these are highlands, right? These are the drumlins. This area floods, so folks are isolated here. If there's an emergency response needed, so the town's interested in being able to move back and forth. I actually have a video of US postal truck that just was delivering but didn't make it back in time, so he had to wait over here to wait for the tides to recede and get across, because one of the things you don't want to drive through, even if it's semi-shallow, it's salt water. It's not good for your cars, and if you have a Tesla, I'd be extremely afraid. So there is a wastewater treatment pump station located here in disrepair. It's exceeded its life maybe,
Exactly.
right? So we have to do something about that. So can the town come up with, okay, we have to be able to deal with not so much maybe flooding here, but to be able to get that forth. And then we also have critical infrastructure we have to deal with, and some of the other town structures that are there. So quickly through this, near-term, mid-term, long-term strategies were proposed. And I only put this up here not to go into detail, but the different approaches that might be taken in the immediate near term. And then what are we doing in the midterm and then the long term for this area? And as you can imagine, if you looked at other areas that were problematic and you were thinking of this adaptation roadmap in mind, these different components may change. So it's specific to the area, but you'll see a couple of things. Home elevation. So if we have to elevate the roads, let's see if we can get residents to participate. Right? I'll get into that real quick. And then we're through the phase. We're about to enter into the last phase of this. I'm just going to skip this. And we've had a number of public engagements to first at least explain the project at different places where we were with this project, and then where we're going, and we continue to do that. And then we keep track of what people are saying, okay? So expectations, and I just wanted to briefly talk about that. So, the town isn't there to save your home necessarily, that's your home. But we can identify aids on how to maybe help you adapt. And also to think about, hey, what is this place going to look like down the road? And have you thought about alternatives? Is it merely an adaptation of lifestyle? Or are you interested in elevating your home, say, for instance? And so, at least until recently, and I'd say a year and a half ago, FEMA offered a home elevation grant program, which would fund up to 75% of the cost to elevate your homes. So residents had to come up with the remaining cash, but residents couldn't apply for that money. So they had to apply through the town through the state, and then through FEMA. There's a lot of detail that goes into that. And one of the points that came up on our meeting last week was, if you buy into the FEMA process of elevating your homes, you are required to have flood insurance on that building for its life, whether it's yours or not. So there are certain conditions that are in place and certain eligibility requirements. And then how high do you elevate your home? How high do you do those? And so Situate, Marshfield, I know, are active and provide the community with that expertise. And so you'll have to find contractors to do all of your work and fill out an application. And that process can take, the application and award waiting is about a year. And then, hopefully you're ready to go, and then you'll have your home elevated in a 2 or 3 years. The other thing that is starting to resonate, or at least being discussed across the nation, maybe even globally, is retreat. And you might have heard it as managed retreat. Let's manage to get all of these people out of harm's way. And managed retreat really applies to, in my sense, something like when Sandy blew through New Jersey, right? And all of these homes were destroyed. And so the municipalities, the state government, the federal government had to go in and help manage that retreat, because some of those you couldn't go back to. When we're talking about the climate adaptation roadmap, we're talking about maybe plan for it. How bad is this really? You know, at some point, are you ready to give up? When would that be? And then at some point down the road, whether there's humans on the planet or not, that area is probably gonna be underwater. And I don't know when that will be. I do have an idea, but I don't wanna go into that. So in closing, John, you wanna speak on this? I'll turn it over to you here.
Sure.
Just wrap us up. So we're gonna talk about here quickly this, I think it's a couple of slides. And then we're gonna close up with other problem areas in whole that we're thinking of doing a similar type of approach to. Thanks, John.
Okay, so if you recall the prior slide that was shown, Chris showed from the early 1600s. Yeah, this was an open area. So what, and historically, this has been a wetland area. The area right now, it's a parkland. Okay, so we have a playground here, a park here, and our wastewater pumping station is out at this end. And so what we thought here is, and the concept is to restore it back to a wetland. And so the idea here will be, we'll let this area flood, let it build up, and the water will flow out to this way. So we're gonna relocate the pump station, build a tidal pool at this location, use the revetment that's protecting the pump station right now.
So here's another view of that.
Okay, right in this area, right. So this is, the water would come in, and actually the water would be coming out this way to flow into the bay on this side. That's the whole concept of this plan. And this is where the playground is, Moreland Avenue is that area, and Module Road is here. So there'd be a bridge in order to get vehicles over into the upper portions of Hampton Circle. There may be a tide gate here in order to control the amount of water coming in or going out. And and there'd be a wall around the perimeter of this wetland area, this reconstructed wetland, so that it, again, provides some level of flood protection to the homes on either side. So that's the overall concept. And again, this area higher here, different types of higher marsh, lower marsh, and the water would then be able to flow out.
So just one quick point on that too. The design elevation for this is about 8 feet. And remember the flooding
The
photograph
top of the wall.
I showed you earlier? That's flooding at 9 feet, right? So this won't solve that thing. But smaller events, the frequent nuisance flooding that's been occurring. And
Again,
that's
the
important
king
to-
tide of type events, that's what this will protect against. Is there another slide?
Yeah, go on, let's see what we got.
And this is an example of the type of pump station that we're talking about. We're building this. This is another pump station in the Pemberton section of Hull. These pumping stations pump wastewater from the low area to the main part of the treatment system. And this is elevated to a 2070 elevation, that elevation that Chris had talked about. And this controls all our generator, emergency generator, the electrical controls, HVAC controls. And we have an underground pump station, again, submersible that's resilient against getting wet. And it's meant to get wet, and so that can flood, that will pump the wastewater, but it's all controlled by an above ground structure such as shown here. This is our old station, and we'll be converting that to a stormwater station. Because again, when this area floods, we want to be able to get the water out of this area. So this is very similar to what we envisioned to be located in the Hampton Circle area. So did you have something?
Yeah, quickly on this, and then, John, I'm gonna ask him to speak on some of the other problem areas. So remember expectations, what are folks' expectations? What's the town's expectations? And we didn't have this answer. You know, in my mind, when Hampton Circle first was on our radar about what to do, my expectations was, let's stop the flooding there, right? And that's not realistic. And then what are the residents' expectations? And I think they're realizing that they also will have to adapt accordingly and be part of the effort that the town's doing for both the pump house, the roads, and that kind of thing. And so these were some of the questions that have come up that we're addressing. Why are you bringing the water closer? You know, that's probably a legitimate question, and we'd have to explain that. It's not necessarily bringing it closer, it's controlling it, right? So that it's not flooding your home. It's preparing and providing a flood capacity area, those kinds of things. Are we making wetlands? And what about mosquitoes? So all of those things. And I didn't, there was a whole number of things that came up as we started to explore the details of the design where it's at. And we're still working on it. We don't have it all ironed out. So other frequent problem areas. I did want to talk, our public school, high school and middle school there now, is located right at this point. And what we're seeing now is this area flooding across and isolating that from the rest of the town. And so this is a low area in the road. And this one might actually be a simple road elevation design, because there isn't a whole lot of abutting houses. Can you imagine if you had to elevate your road? Somebody coming out of their house and like, well, how do I get up to my, so you have to adjust, right? So this one looks like that might be a simple design. That's another area where.
Let me just point out also that this is the location of our wastewater treatment facility at the lowest, narrowest location in the town. Northeast storms come this way, we're very vulnerable and we've been hit.
Pure slide, right?
Yeah, we've been hit a number of occasions. The plant was first built in 1978. 2 months before startup, the blizzard of 78 hit. Wiped the whole facility out. We had flooding from all the overwash that came over the seawall and filled up 33 feet from the bottom to the top of the facility.
Were those the pictures you were gonna share with me?
So, yes, so it took 2 years and $2 million at that time to reconstruct the plant and get it operational again. And since that time, we've been flooded on other occasions. And so since I've been here.
3 minutes, John.
Okay, we've been taking a lot of different measures in order to make the plant more resilient. We've elevated the electric transformer system. We've elevated the electrical system. We've converted the pumps to submersible pumps made to run underwater. We're looking at a berm to be placed around the plant. So there's a lot of different things that we've done. And not only have we done this, but the town has taken measures to reconstruct the seawall along the Itasca Avenue. What we've talked about tonight at Hampton Circle is just one example of what we expect to be able to transfer over to other locations throughout the town. And we hope that other towns will also be able to use similar ideas and similar concepts in their communities. So there's a lot going on, and we're hoping that you'll be able to take this back with you and share with others in your communities.
That's it.
Wrap up.
Yeah. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, wow, yeah. Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks, John, for jumping in. And also thanks, Joanna, for handling some questions online and the slides and all that. That's been really helpful. I do have there's a few points here. Thank you for all you're doing to help inform everyone about these pressing climate issues. I live in Humrock and I really appreciate this so much. Is the underground part of the pumping station resistant to salt water?
Yes.
John? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, they'll have a special coating for the concrete structure. And, but we don't expect salt water to get in it because it is made watertight. Before we even build it, we check it for water tightness.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, John.
And we don't expect to go into it during a flood event.
Okay. Okay.
So it's totally watertight.
I mean, if there's any questions here at the audience, you guys are welcome to ask. Otherwise, I'll go through some of the ones here. Let's see. Will the slides be available online? Yes, this entire presentation will be recorded. It is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel, the North South Rivers, and we can share to whoever needs it. So I'm assuming we share with the town of Hall as well. Are your plans also shared with other communities like Hingham?
Actually, this project has actually gotten a lot of, has had many platforms for presentation. We presented this at the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissioners. We also shared it at the Mass Floodplains Manager Conference. I actually presented on a managed retreat at Columbia University about 2 years ago. So we have with Hingham Hingham, we actually are on an email link with Hingham, Cohasset, Situate, and some of the South Shore communities. So we're always exchanging conservation issues. As far as adaptation, we're not doing a whole lot. And I know that they've done a lot of nature-based approaches as well. So we should coordinate a little better with the neighboring communities.
I live in Hull on Hampton Circle, and I appreciate Chris and John for focusing efforts in our area.
Great.
Yeah. A few questions. Would contact information of the presenters be available? Is that something?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sorry, I don't have a slide that has it up there, but the Conservation Department, it's actually Climate Adaptation and Conservation in Hull. Just go to that website and there's contact information there. And also John, our director, is always accessible to at the wastewater treatment facility.
And we also have on the webpage, Hull Sewer Department.
Okay. Awesome. And everyone who is here online should have my email. So if there's any questions after the fact or any you want to get in touch, you can email me and I can field those to Chris and John. So yeah, thanks so much, everyone. And
One last opportunity.
Oh, yeah. So we do have a living shoreline field trip planned. And you're welcome to attend and you can register for that. Again, this presentation will be available in various platforms, but also the slide deck will be available on the Town of Hull's website as well. I think if you want, there's an opportunity online to register at the QR code that's online, and here you can use your phones to do that as well, or feel free to give me a shout if you're interested.
yeah, thanks so much. You had over 80 people that tuned in online, which is great. That's great.
Great.
Yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks, Katie, for having us and for kind of hosting us and having great signage and everything. We really appreciate the partner with Mass Audubon as always. Big thank you to our sponsors, Clean Harbors and the Massachusetts Cultural Councils of Hingham, Marshfield, Situate, Norwell, Pembroke, and Rockland. Thanks so much for your continued support. Tune in next week. We'll be live here as well. Please feel free to come here in person. Next week, February 11th, Wednesday, nature photography with Sean Carey, wildlife photography 101, ditch the blurry birds, live here at Mass Audubon or obviously on Zoom. So ready to take your nature photos from meh to magnificent. Join seasoned photographer Sean Carey for a crash course in capturing stunning wildlife while observing nature thoughtfully and ethically. So enjoy great stories, inspiring images, and pro tips you can use even on a budget. Stop snapping endlessly and start creating photos you'll actually want to print and share. So that is next week. So yeah, thanks so much, Chris. Thanks, John. Thanks, Joanna out there. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Really appreciate it. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah, they're just guaranteed.